And I'd just like to say thank you to Future Cities for inviting me here to your beautiful city and for providing me with true British summer weather. That's been fantastic. As a starting point, as a matter of interest, how many people here have heard of or know what the GSM Association is, or the GSMA? Oh, that's more than I normally get, so that's a good start. Well, for those of you who don't know, the GSMA represents almost every single mobile operator on the planet. We span more than 220 countries, and on top of that, we also have 230 other companies within our ecosystems. Those include manufacturers. Alcatel-Lucent, I believe, are a member as well as other players such as Facebook. So all of these entities are part of our wider membership group. Those operators that you see up there are not a random selection of operators. Those 24 operators that you see are our board members, and they are responsible for setting the strategic direction that the GSMA takes. The point that I'm trying to make is that everything the GSMA does is seen as paramount activities within the mobile industry as a whole. So within this presentation, I may be very mobile focused, and that is why. Within the GSMA, we do follow a number of different areas. Those include things like spectrum, government and regulatory areas, also by pushing new technologies such as m-commerce, NFC, for example. And then another part is connected living. And as you can see by the tagline there, it's to create a world where everything intelligently connects via wireless networks, delivering rich services to businesses and consumers in every aspect of their lives. So what does that mean exactly? Well, We've already established throughout the day that most people here have smartphones. But again, as a quick poll, who uses their smartphone for more than just texting and phone calls? Anybody who isn't putting their hand up is obviously lying. But the point again, mobile technology is part of everyday life now. It's not just mobile phone calls. It's not just writing SMSs. So, as part of the Connected Living program, we have specific verticals, particularly in education, health, and automotive, that then fall under the remit of smart cities to develop that ecosystem further. With regards to the actual smart cities program itself, as I said before, it's to focus and it's to promote and support the development and deployment of smart city solutions. We're a relatively new project, and before now we were looking specifically at utilities and supporting the city of Barcelona, which for some of you may know is listed as the mobile world capital because of their emphasis on mobile technologies. But within this financial year, we've been spreading out on a much more global basis to look at places like Dubai and Shanghai. Further to that, we discovered that there's no ranking system anywhere that ranks how smart cities are from a mobile basis. And this is quite important, and I'll tell you why now. This is what the connected life looks like by 2020, at least by our research. By 2020, there's going to be 26 billion total connected devices, and almost half of those are going to be via mobile. This presents an interesting scenario whereby the operators are obviously going to start playing, mobile technology is going to play a very important role regardless of what ecosystem you look at. And if you look at what the addressable revenue is, and this is just from the mobile operators, I know there was another large figure thrown up earlier, but $1.1 trillion by 2020, that's the addressable market worldwide. And if you look at that map, and if you look at the map from Europe, that's almost a quarter of that is accounted for there. Further to that, we break down what we see as connected devices. So you can see there you've got health, automotive, smart cities, other M2M, things like IPTV, for example, handsets and tablets. So this is where the addressable revenue sits. Further to that, mobile technology is already here, and the concept of M2M is something that is nothing new. And when I was asked today to come and talk about future services and policy, so many services are already here The technology already exists. And it's demonstrated here. Look, you've got 427 operators. That's over half the mobile operators in the world, across 175 countries, offering 190 million M2M mobile connections. That was last year. That number is only, not even last year now, sorry. Year before last. That number is set to increase exponentially. So how does that number break down? Well, here we are looking specifically at what we as the GSMA see as the key markets or the key services that mobile technology can provide. Obviously, you can see a huge growth in connected car, and we've already had a lot of presentations today about people who are doing stuff within automobiles. Smart metering, energy efficiency. We've heard about smart grids, energy efficient buildings. There's a huge emphasis on green technology. The gentleman from Stockholm was talking about. These are again a massive growth, and the one that's probably the most important or derives the greatest revenue for the entire ecosystem is actually security and tracking. Now, as you can see, there's already 45 million connections, and that's due to grow to 276 million. But that makes up an enormous proportion, almost 60% of all income of all addressable revenue within the mobile space. So now I have to talk about mobile operators because it's my job. So what you've got here is a typical M2M value chain. And this is where does the operator fit into this? Where does the rest of the ecosystem fit into this? So in this first model, this is the GM OnStar, which is basically streaming online services through your vehicle. That can either be doing health checks on vehicles or streaming online content. There's a number of different services that can be provided in there. In this scenario, Telefonica are playing very much the role of a mobile operator, simply just providing connectivity. And the biggest problem that they face is that deriving enough revenue just by providing connectivity doesn't actually make business sense. So then we have to take it one step further. This is Bosch Industry 4.0 pilot. I'm not sure how many of you will be familiar with this, but this is basically fully automated manufacturing using M2M technology. Again, what you can see here is that Vodafone has actually increased their position in the value chain to actually provide the big data storage for the actual solution. This has been deployed across Germany already. Now, the next solution, this is truly doing an end-to-end solution. Unless AT&T start to build homes, that's the closest that you're going to get to an actual end-to-end solution with it as an operator. They provide every part of the value chain. But the question then has to be raised: is this smart cities? Does this fill the remit of smart cities? And the simple answer is no. This is very much a case of consumer-facing solutions that are available to an individual. It's not focusing on a city. So you take AT&T Digital Life, for example. That's an in-home solution that you as a customer have to go and purchase. Or GM OnStar, that's provided by the automakers. It doesn't necessarily talk with the city. But this is an example from KT. Now, KT in particular have been very strong in moving themselves away from that typical mobile operator role to actually becoming an end-to-end service provider. They now see themselves as service providers more than mobile operators. They provide more than connectivity. They now often manage network services, and they also provide platforms and content. And this gives you an example of the benefit that they've derived as a result of making that move. They used to just, previously, we're talking about their taxi service. They just had to provide location data. That was it. Provide tracking location data for their taxis. However, once the Korean government realized the value that KT was actually delivering, they then offered them a 5-year contract where they grew their revenue by they more than 10 times their revenue. Now, if you look at that from just taking the city of Seoul, you've got 70,000 taxis in Seoul. making $50 a taxi, so that's $600 a year per taxi, which translates roughly to $42 million a year just in the city of Seoul. That doesn't seem like too much of a bad idea. And the beauty of all of this was that it didn't cost the Korean government a cent. They developed a business model whereby they gave the taxi service to KT or this particular platform. They developed it, and then they implemented it at their cost, and now they're deriving huge benefit as a result of it. So now let's talk about barriers. And this is what I was talking about before when we talk about services. We've heard today so many fantastic services that are already out there, and really when it comes to policy, that's when things really start to matter. As I said at the beginning of my talk, we've been working with other cities around the world, and we've been very fortunate in some cases to have a lot of greenfield thinking with some of them, who have gone, right, we want to be a smart city, go and do it. What do you need to do? Now, these traditionally have been not as heavily developed, particularly in the telecoms market. It's very tricky in Europe, particularly. So regulation isn't so much of an issue. That is probably the biggest barrier that we have to look for. But there's also the bringing the ecosystem together. That requires more than just somebody saying, I'm going to work with you. We were talking about Vodafone, and we were talking about the Bosch example, working with Vodafone, but that's just Bosch working with Vodafone. If you want to be a smart city, we look at it from the case of you have to have ubiquitous services. Everything that you provide has to be available to absolutely every citizen that lives in the city. And at the moment, what you get is siloed thinking, particularly when we talk with the mobile operators. They're very much siloed thinking in that, oh, we're competitors, we're going to do this, and we're going to move forward and not think about anything else. Other areas that I would highlight at this point is the establishment of business models. And again, this is where that top-down process comes from. I'm delighted to hear that Porto is so active in actually trying to create a smart city, that they're willing to listen to ideas about how value can be derived, both for the ecosystem players as well as with the city itself and the citizens. Whereas what we have found traditionally is the cities will go, that's a great idea, you pay for it. When you get that open thinking of, right, we want to be a smart city and this is how we're going to achieve it, you take a very strategic approach, and you have to realize that everybody in your ecosystem has to make money. All of a sudden, attitudes start to change. I'll just come back to regulation, and then this will be my final point. Regulation is tricky. I used to work in privacy, and sometimes it's outside of the city's control. Regulation around privacy, particularly in Europe. You look at the areas of big data and how you use anonymized information. Very tricky area in Europe. And that doesn't necessarily, and then as a result, you can't necessarily say to a city, well, you're not doing anything, and it doesn't work the other way around either. So then that is just, you've got to work with what you got, and you have to lobby for things to change. And that should be a policy where if people are truly looking to drive towards these incredible services that are already available, I'll stress that again, these services are already available, but if you want to implement, and if you want them implemented, you need to drive that change. You need to drive that change together as an ecosystem. Thank you. Oh, sorry, there is this one more slide, but unfortunately I'm out of time, so I don't have time to go through it. But some very quick numbers here, and the most important one: $400 billion will be saved through end-to-end connectivity using mobile phones. So go for mobile. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and yeah, I'm around for questions.